Hey. Thanks, man. Thank you all for coming. Hope you're having a good day. Dylan! Sorry, I haven't seen Dylan in person. So Dylan and I work on the same team at Google, but we've never seen each other in physically. No, not physically, in real life. So, hey, Dylan. Where do I get started? Right, so this is a super quick introduction into using Flutter as a development tool. So does anybody actually use Flutter? Awesome, awesome. Right, so when I make mistakes, you're up. Okay, so basically, Flutter is a really good way if you just want to introduce yourself into development. It's a really good way to learn development because it has lots of niceties in there, but it also has lots of things for the more experienced developer. So I'm going to cover the introduction for people who are new to the language and just want to get introduced to development. Okay, super introduction. Okay, so what I'm going to cover today is tell you a bit about myself, a bit about Flutter, and then we're just going to go through building a super basic application. So the reason this is called Flutter for the casual developer is most of us have daytime jobs, so we don't have time to spend hours and hours and hours learning how to develop in a particular language. So Flutter's really cool for that. So does anybody use HTML or JavaScript or anything like that? Don't be ashamed. You know, you've got lots of hate on the internet about JavaScript, but JavaScript's cool as well. So Flutter is super, super relevant in terms of HTML, CSS, all that good stuff, JavaScript. So I have to do the obligatory thing about me. So my name is Rich Rose. I am a lab architect at Google Cloud, which means I get to build various things in the cloud. I also have, well, let me take a step back from that. So basically, if you ever use things like Cloud Skills Boost or Pluralsight or Coursera with a Google tint, you're probably using some of the artifacts that I've worked on. So in terms of me, I like to write stuff down all the time. So hence, I have a couple of books. So the first one, serverless, is for those of you who don't like infrastructure, serverless is a great way not to have to handle any infrastructure. So the first book is basically telling you how to do that in terms of Google Cloud. So App Engine, Cloud Functions, Cloud Run. For those of you who don't care about infrastructure, there's another book, which is about Flutter and Dart specifically. And this is written specifically from the perspective of, where's she gone? My awesome wife, Dawn, who, I want to say 2 years ago, or maybe it's two. Okay, 2 years ago was like, I'm on this course and I don't really get it. And it was a course about Flutter. And having spent the weekend tearing my hair out when I had hair, trying to explain various things about how Flutter works and its relationship to other languages, this book came out of that. So all of the chapters are taking you from the perspective of someone who just wants to use the language and build something. So most books take you through the process of, I need to teach you the fundamentals. If you go Strustrup level stuff, I'm assuming you're all computer science people. No, okay. If you go down the route of just general introduction stuff, then this book is basically aimed at you. So I don't want to learn how to develop. I just want to build an application and ship it. So it's built in that perspective. Okay, onwards and upwards. So Flutter, I'm not going to spend too much time on Flutter because Flutter is just basically super awesome. It's super quick to learn, really, really easy to get into, and you can build things in minutes, which is unlike other things. So the blurb around Flutter is it's multi-platform, which means it runs on iOS, Android, web, Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Fuchsia. I think I've missed one out, but I can't remember what the other one is. Oh, yeah.
It took ages to figure that out, why that screen wasn't working. He's sharing his camera, but his camera is blocked over, and that's why it's on the Zoom controls.
Oh, it's that one. Hang on, 2 secs. Yay. There you go.
Now when you share your screen. There you go. Now.
Oh, okay. Wow, hallelujah. Okay. So for anybody else in the crowd, I'm available to fix printers and other IT things. Thank you. Okay. Flutter again. No worries, man. You can do lots of fundamental things. So once you get past the easy stage of using Flutter, which is basically stateless stuff, so you don't want to store any information. And FYI, anybody building apps, stop storing information. It's unnecessary most of the time, unless you're doing credentials, authentication, that kind of stuff. But for me, just scrolling through a page, I don't need you to store stuff. So please take that on board. You can also develop games with it. The testing is integrated into it as well. So that's super cool. The Firebase stuff. So for those of you who don't know, Firebase is basically a suite of stuff. So you can do like authentication, hosting, some other things that I never use, cloud functions, and some other things. It's super easy to use. I guess the main downside of using Firebase is it's quite complicated to learn at first because it's very different to how things normally work. But once you actually know how it works, it's very easy to use. Okay. Any questions so far? No? Good. Let's move on quickly. This is super confusing. Okay. So the Flutter demo. So the Flutter demo is basically, has anybody heard of the World Cup? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, like interaction from the crowd. It's always good. So the demo is basically what did we do? We flew, didn't we? Yeah, when I was on the plane, built this. So this is a super quick introduction into using Flutter. So on the screen, you have an application, and the application has many things in there. So it's very similar to what you'd see anywhere else. So it's got some stuff, and you get some data, you put that data onto the screen, and then you're good. But in terms of the World Cup, it basically represents the group stage. So you can go scroll through each of the groups, see the teams in the groups, add some data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a good template in terms of if you want to build an application, essentially think through the process of how the application works, but you can basically use this as a blueprint to build an application. Okay. So building an application. So the first thing we want to do is we want to deconstruct that application. So here, the first bit I can see on the application is right at the top, I've got a button, and then below that, I've got some text, okay? Relatively simple. So one of the things, I'm gonna need a helper, you. So one of the things that you need to do is basically in Flutter, it provides you with lots and lots of components that you can use off the bat. So you don't really need to know how to program. You can just look them up and go, right, I need some text, I need a button. So that's basically what we're going to do here. Can you hold this? So, right. Okay. Oh, thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the steps that we need. And luckily, I've whacked all my stuff onto GitHub, so I'll just cut and paste like a good programmer. Right. Not yet. So what you see on screen is basically your entire application, okay? So I want to make sure you all just, so this is a super short application in terms of everything that's on screen. But what you end up with is, if I just zoom this, oh, no rest. What you end up with is this. So 1 second, 1 minute, we've ended up with our application. So we've got the button at the top and we've got some text as well. So the wonderful thing about Flutter, that reminded me of something then. Oh, Tigger. It's kind of like the wonderful thing. No Winnie the Pooh fans? Okay. The wonderful thing about Flutter is that it's very template driven. So most of the stuff that you actually come across is actually, you don't really need to understand how it works. The bit that you do need to understand how it works is right at the bottom. So if I just make this a bit smaller, that's a good size. So the first thing that we will have is we always have a reference to how the application works. So in Flutter, the application construct is called a widget. And a widget is basically just a thing. Yes, component, yeah. So in terms of, if you want to do something specific, this is what you look for. So if you want to do something like a list, you look for a list. If you want to do something like text, you look for text. All of it is very self-explanatory in terms of that. In terms of just adding it onto the screen, however, it's all essentially just a big list of components. So you say, what I want to have on this screen is I've added some padding and I've got an icon here. So that button at the top is basically an icon. So that is going to be a button that we can press. And then below that, the FIFA and the World Cup is just text. Okay. So I've added some niceties because, you know, I was a bit bored on the plane. But apart from that, you just basically add on text and you add your text in. Boom. Okay. So this is why Flutter is good in terms of a learning language, because you can basically just go onto the internet and go, oh, I like how that looks on screen, and cut and paste it and then add it into your application. Boom, done. Yep. The Flutter people are looking at me now going, you're making it sound too simple. But it basically is that simple. Just cut and paste in comparison to other languages. No disrespect to Flutter, but it makes it, being simplistic is not a bad thing. Okay, so that gives us our first thing. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, if I just switch back to here, is we want to add some information. Now, this is the bit where you'll probably differ in terms of your background. So if you've done computer science, all of this bit will be familiar with you, but I'm just going to take you through this as if you haven't done that. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to retain some information on our application. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use something called a list. And a list is basically just a contiguous memory block, so an array, effectively. And we're going to use that to hold our the names of the groups in the World Cup. So here we have Group A, Group B, Group C. As simple as that. So we add that into our application. Bada bing. And because it's Flutter, it's actually called a list, which is what it is as a data structure. So that's cool. So then the next thing we need to do is we need to add a bit of complexity. So the bit of complexity here is that what we want to do is we want to have a relationship developed between a name and an item. So in this instance, we are going to use something called a map. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, hopefully you use maps all over the place, but a map is basically just a key value pairing. So if you imagine that you have an item such as a group, you know that in the World Cup, there is Group A, Group B, Group C. So the pairing, the key is the group, the value that you get back is the A, B, C. Similar for the name. So the name of the team, you can say is Netherlands. And if you want to get that value, you use the key name and all the way through. So this structure is really, really helpful because you can use it to build quite a fanciful array of information, not an array, but a map of information. So here we've just got group, name, and flag, but you can actually extend this in terms of if you wanted to add on, say, team manager, I don't know, favorite drink, all that good stuff into this. And this extends your data structure independently of your application. And the reason we do that will become clear in a minute. Okay, so that's maps. So we're going to use a map for our group team information. So each team is being added to a map. So here I have Team Netherlands with the information that is Netherlands are in Group A, the name of the team is Netherlands, and the flag of the country is using an API external. Okay, so now we have that. The next bit is the clever bit. So in Flutter, rather than having to write lots of fancy algorithms, you can actually combine your data structures. And this is the power of Flutter now. So we already know how to use a list because that's just a contiguous block of memory. And now we also know how to use maps. So what if we combined the two? So by combining the two, we can have a list item of group A, and then we can have that list access a map. And by doing that, that gives us our grouping of all of the teams that are in Group A. Actually, I forgot to mention, so lists are zero-based. So as all good numbering systems, stop counting from 1, count from 0. So here we're going to have access to item 0 in the list is Group A, 0 group item 1 in the list is Group B, and so on. Okay, so what does that give us? Okay, so that gives us the ability to have data at the back end of our application. And by having data at the back end of our application, we can now populate our application with a new entry, which is a tab bar. And a tab bar is basically a grouping of things. So I have Group A, I have Group B, and I have Group C. And the impetus there is that you basically press the tab button and it tabs across each one, backwards and forwards. Okay, so it's super easy to use. It's a nice way to group information that you have. And it's relatively straightforward to implement as well. So we have that. So once we've done that, then as a nicety, I've added on a grid view. So a grid view is this bit that you get at the bottom. So this bit at the bottom, basically a quadrant. So this is item 1, oh, item 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, counting's off. So what that does is it allows you to access the information that you have in terms of the data and put it on screen. Okay, so the reason I'm telling you this is because this is repeatable. So you can basically add in whatever you like into your data structure. And then when you run your application, so if you went into the alternate world of World Cups, where you only have 2 teams, you can change your data structure to take out Senegal and Qatar and just display Netherlands and Ecuador. Similarly, if you went into another alternate world and they had 10 teams, you could still alter your data structure and Flutter will automatically do the niceties and present all the additional teams in there. Okay, so the way that it does that is way beyond this conversation, but what you're looking for there is basically a builder. So whenever you're using Flutter, save yourself a massive amount of effort don't learn the easy way, always use the builder. Okay, so what does that look like after we've done? So if I just switch. Okay, so if I just switch, bada bing, to 6. Boom. So let's just make that really small. Okay. So now we have our application built, and we've said for group A, these are our teams. So we've taken our information from our map, whacked it into there. We've used our API call, so we get a nice flag. And then we've got some additional text just to say, oh, it's in group A, okay? So you do this for each of your elements in terms of group A, group B, group C, etc. And that gives you a super introduction into Flutter. And as you will see from the code, scrolly, it's still a relatively short program because it's all self-contained effectively. So I should mention as well, the reason I'm using Dartpad is because most people don't want to install lots of stuff, libraries, packages, all that stuff on your machine. So when you're starting as a casual developer, just use Dartpad, okay? It has lots of limitations, but ignore those until you get to the point where you think, actually, Flutter is for me. At that point in time, then you go down the road of, I need to be on VS Code or Android Studio. I'm not going to make a comment because I use Vim, not any of those. So you do what you do. When you get to that point in time, when you go down the implementation and installation route, do be mindful that you need quite a powerful machine in order to run these things. So the best course of action, and this cycles back to where I work, use the cloud. And if you use the cloud, you can actually have a machine that is super powerful in the cloud running. And then when you finish doing your development, turn it off. Costs you pennies. There you go. Okay, so that's that. If I just switch back to you. Sweet. Any questions? Stunned audience. I'll stay away from the theological. I'm in Ireland after all.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Just a question about with Flutter, obviously you can target desktop, web, iOS, Android. Is it tricky or fiddly at all if you want to make very specific adjustments for a set platform in your experience so far? If I want to do something more for web or make it a little bit more iOS-y, a little bit less material, is that fiddly to do so, or is it pretty straightforward? Thank you.
Thank you. That's an awesome question. I don't want to get myself into trouble, so I'm going to be very political in my answer. So for me, okay, let's do a quick thing. Okay, this is over to you. What's the most popular platform in the world? Anyone? For targeting an application. Web? Yep, are we all agreed on web? Okay, there's your answer. Target the web, work on that. So from a development perspective, the web is much easier to target. From a, if you want to make money, probably want to avoid that. If you need the niceties of a particular platform, so the native elements of the mobile, then you need to pick which side of the fence you're on. I'm firmly on the Android side because I like to tinker, but if you're on the other side, then, you know, then you do you. You need to do stuff. But yeah, definitely, if you, again, when you're starting, always target the web, because it's very low resource requirements, so you can just run it on anything. But you can also test really, really quickly. It's a very quick iteration. So if you're stuck in the airport or on a train or whatever, you can just do that. If you're targeting iOS or Android, you're going to be one of those people that annoys you on the train where they just take up the entire table with stuff. So yeah, don't be that guy.
Next, who wants one? There you go. I'll be over to you next.
So as we can understand, Flutter is multi-platform, easy to learn, and awesome. So why doesn't its name known like in Ireland that much? What do you think personally?
Thank you. That's just tough questions today. I think there's a bit of a culture war in terms of languages at the moment, and we are becoming, as a community, very we are becoming very I forget what the actual word is. No. Tribal, yes. The fancy word of tribal, whoever said that. I don't know what that is. I can't remember. No, I was thinking of the negative, not the positive context. So we are becoming very tribal in terms of languages at the moment. But certainly when I was at uni a long time ago, the definitive instruction was just try and learn. Forget all the nonsense about what language you pick. It doesn't really matter. Just learn a language and then learn another one and then learn another one. Minimum, you should learn at least 5 languages and be good in 2. And then you're good. But there's lots of nonsense about you must pick this and you must pick that. It doesn't really matter. So if you do JavaScript, you're awesome. If you do Python, I can't really go down that path, but you might also be awesome as well. If you do like Go, Rust, again, you're awesome. Being able to develop is not an easy thing. So you should be proud of the fact that you can actually do that. When you get down to the niceties of which language, people just, and these are when I say people, the people who make the decisions in terms of spending the money, in terms of, oh, you should do this, it hasn't reached them yet. In terms of, if I went to Flutter and used that, it'd be a much quicker development cycle. It would be probably cheaper to do that as well, especially if you're targeting mobile. But it's one of those things where, what's that thing they say, that the future's already here, you just haven't experienced it yet. Flutter is definitely one of those things.
One more. Now, there you go.
Hi. I don't have any understanding on Flutter, so I just read that it is for embedded platforms as well, supports embedded platforms. Do you have any example on what platforms it usually run, any memory constraints or like that? Memory CPU constraints? Yeah.
The first thing that strikes me about your question is non-technical person asked me technical question. It's great juxtaposition of that. So if you're in a memory constrained environment, I would go for a lower level language anyway. I wouldn't choose Flutter. I think Flutter's awesome in terms of if you are in a situation where you need to build something quickly that looks nice, great application for Flutter. If you're in a situation where you're working in a team and that the team's not very experienced, that's a great application for Flutter. if you're working in a team that is experienced in terms of building front ends and working with that, that's also a good application for Flutter. But you in that team, you'll need to deal with the politics, because as the gentleman over there says, people have very specific ideas about development. And Flutter works in a slightly different way. It tries to simplify a lot of things that previously are very complicated. So there you go.
Popular man, Mr. Rose.
I'm just following. It's not really a question, but a more of a statement, I suppose. We're following on what you're saying about languages. I mean, I'm in between a non-technical and technical person, so I've done development a very long time ago. But I'm involved in a team that we built our own UI framework specifically for so we can deal with the requirements that we need. But I do deal with React developers and stuff. But you know, I feel that sometimes the React or Flutter or whatever, they're focused on that particular framework, and they could be absolutely fantastic coders, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're actually develop good quality code. I feel, for you have to have a very good user experience, know your use cases, but know the system, how the system works, how people use the system, stuff like that. And no matter how good of a coder you are, if you're focusing on just the syntax and the code, and even React, there's a lot of, I know developers will go to Stack Overflow and do copy and paste. No, it might have an idea, might do what it's supposed to do, but you throw in code that you're unsure of, doesn't necessarily mean it suits even though it might satisfy the use case, it might necessarily mean the most efficient way of doing it. So, I mean, that's more of a statement. So, forget about the languages like Flutter, React, or any of those. I'm sure they all have their merits, but you have to know what the system is. You have to know the user. You have to know your use cases, what the system does. Can your system do what it needs? You have to add on to your system, stuff like that. So I'll be always trying to focus on people who ask me questions. That's what you should be focused on, the system. The rest of it's just superfluous. I think, as you said, it doesn't matter what language you use. Doesn't really matter, I think. So that's more of a statement than a question. So that's easy to answer, particularly for broadcasting and behalf of Brian Lawless.
Thanks, Strawberry.
Cool. Come to my tech talk, huh? Quick.
I hear you. I challenge what you're saying. So I'm learning. See, Dylan's like the soft side. He's taught me how to speak softly. So the number one thing to remember in terms of any language, no language is perfect, okay? But when you are building things, the more important thing is to build quick, build fast. Being able to iterate quickly in terms of something that doesn't work is priceless. So where we work, we build quickly. The stuff we throw away is ridiculous on a daily basis, but we build things so that in the future, you can actually use it. And I bore my wife to death with this, but always, if you're building something, developing something, whatever, think about you a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and go, right, how would this be useful to that person? And in that way, you can say, this is garbage, throw it away, move on. Or actually, this has some potential. My repo has loads of things in it, absolutely tons. I don't use all of it, but at some point in time, it comes in useful. That's where you need to be. So, there's lots of frameworks and guidelines and fancy things that you can do. The main thing is just think about what you're doing. Does it make sense or not? And if you say, yes, it makes sense, build it as quickly as possible and then move on.
Like building a presentation, really, isn't it? There you go.
Thank you. So this is a loaded question, so bugger off is a perfectly acceptable answer. We're doing the Compose talk later, so obviously Compose and Flutter live in a similar space, a lot of developers trying to decide between one and the other. So where do they sit in your head, and when would you recommend one rather than the other? What do you see as the pros and cons of both?
Bugger off. Yeah, no, No, it's a super good point. I think, you know, that's more of an individual decision. So, you know, always do you first if you can. Okay. If you don't get the opportunity to have that input in the process of what you're doing, then, you know, you just have to go with it or get a new job. But always do you first, and always think about good career advice. Always think about whether the technology that your company or your organization is adopting is a good fit long term. Because if it's not, you're probably wasting your years in terms of your investment into that, I think.
So just on this, I was wondering, the demo seemed to be like a rapid prototype. Do you think this could fit into like a mainstream production application, or do you think this is more of a design tool and then you migrate out of here to something else?
Yep, good question. Everything I do is rapid prototype. I don't do anything slowly because it's a waste of time. So yes, it's good for rapid prototypes, but it's also good in terms of people who do React. The maintenance cycle on React is just awful. So if you move to something that is good in terms of rapid build, which pretty much all of the web frameworks are, they're built for that. But when you get to the point of I've tested it, I've deployed it, and then I need to maintain it, that's where the difference comes in. So that iteration, that fast cycle then slows down because you can't suddenly do those fixes, those updates, because everything's changed, the framework's changed, platforms change, all of that good stuff. Flutter takes care of the majority of that for you. So it's just very high level components that they fix, you use.
Mr. Rich Rose, we present you with this lovely hoodie. Thank you.
Oh, winner. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Remember, keep the questions coming from Mr. Rich Rose outside. He's happy to answer questions and have a chat.